This happened back around 96 to 97-ish, so I was right around 16 years old. My buddy had a CB radio he took from his brother. We would drive around smoking weed and tune in to the truckers. Occasionally, my buddy would start talking shit to these guys, just to get them all worked up. We met up with my cousins. They lived on a little cul-de-sac that had only 2 houses on it. It was hot out, so we dropped his tailgate to hang out in the street. My cousin stole a few of his dad's beers, so now we were just getting fucked up. My buddy gets on the radio and starts talking to this trucker. And I mean, he started talking mad shit to this guy, saying stuff about his mom and sisters. It was funny at the moment, until it took a turn. The trucker realized it was a bunch of kids messing around, but he wasn't having it. He said, "Y'all know I can find out exactly where you are within 5 minutes, right?" We all looked at each other. My friend was like, "No fucking way, he's blowing smoke trying to scare us." A few minutes of silence goes by. Then we hear the guy say, "I guess you're a bunch of mama's boys, only tough on a radio." He started laughing, so my friend responds back to him. He said, "There's 4 of us here and we would hands down kick your old ass." That's when this guy started getting crazy, weird, and creepy, talking about cutting our heads off and delivering them to our parents in a box. My buddy kept going and continued to piss this guy off. The last thing this guy said was, "I'll see you little fucks in 5. A couple minutes go by, and in the distance, about a few blocks down, we see a truck pull into the sub. No trailer, just the main rig. He sat there for about 30 seconds, then floored it, coming right at us. We couldn't believe it. He pulls up and slams on the brakes, almost hitting my buddy's truck. This guy, probably in his 40s, gets out. Clearly a gym guy because he was huge and pissed. He walked right up to my buddy and grabbed him by the neck and lifted him up. He said, "Who's the tough guy now? It looks like you're a little bitch to me." He held him there for a good minute, not choking him, but kind of choking him. Once he let go of my friend, my cousin started walking towards the guy with a bat. Just then the guy pulls out a pistol and points it right at my cousin's face. He tells him to drop the bat. He said, "I'm not playing your little bitch-ass high school games, son." He then walked over to my friend's truck and yanked the CB radio out, threw it on the ground and smashed the shit out of it. He said, "Next time I will end your life. Don't test me." He got back in his rig and sped off. We all just stood there trying to get a grasp on what just happened. I guess there's a way you can use the CB squelch or whatever it is to track down where the signals are coming from. We talked about calling the cops, but at that time my cousin was already kind of in trouble with the local police in his city for some other stuff, so we decided the last thing we needed was the cops over his house. Besides, we started it anyways. We got what we deserved and decided to just take it as a lesson learned moment and leave it alone. Last night was one of the weirdest nights I've had in a while. I was alone at home, just trying to relax after a long week. I decided to watch some horror movies, even though it's December. Being a big horror fan, I'll watch those movies all year round. Anyways, I'm sitting there on my couch, lights off, just the glow of the TV lighting up the room. I was halfway through a classic slasher flick when I heard this soft knock at the front door. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me pause the movie and listen. I waited for a second. Then it happened again. This faint knock like someone tapping their knuckles, but really softly. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I walked over to check. I opened the door, but no one was there. The street was completely empty, and my porch light was flickering a bit, which added to the creepiness. I figured it was just some random kid messing around, so I closed the door and went back to the couch. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time it wasn't the door. It sounded like it was coming from one of the windows in the living room. I turned off the movie and just sat there listening. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like someone knew exactly where I was sitting and wanted to mess with me. I stood up, looked out the window, but again, nothing. No one. The yard was empty, and the street was dead quiet. At this point, I was getting a little freaked out, but I tried to laugh it off. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, especially after watching horror movies alone in the dark. So I sat back down, turned the movie back on, and tried to forget about it. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard a loud thud coming from the kitchen. It sounded like something heavy falling, but I knew I didn't leave anything out that could make that kind of noise. My heart was pounding, but I went to check it out. When I got to the kitchen, I grabbed a knife to be safe. The first thing I noticed was the fridge door. It was wide open. Now I swear I hadn't opened the fridge all night, and even if I had, there's no way I'd leave it open. But there it was. Door open, cold air spilling out. Nothing looked disturbed or out of place, so I closed it and stood there for a second, just trying to figure out what was going on. Then I heard it again. The soft knocking. This time it was coming from the back door. I froze. I didn't want to go check it, but I also didn't want to just ignore it. So I slowly walked to the back door, holding the knife tightly, and peered through the small window. The yard was empty, just like the front. As I was standing there, staring out into the dark, I heard the front door creak open behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. I rushed to the door and locked it as fast as I could. My hands were shaking. I double-checked all the windows and doors after that, making sure everything was locked up tight. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the middle of my living room with every light on. I didn't hear any more knocking, no more thuds or strange sounds, but someone, or something, was messing with me, just out of sight. By morning, it was like nothing had ever happened. Everything was normal again. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild, but I'm not so sure anymore. When I went out to my car, I noticed something disturbing. My car was filthy, but someone wrote on it and left me a message in the dirt. It said I'll be back soon. I live in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens. That's why I never thought twice about having a bonfire alone in my backyard one evening. It was a crisp fall night, and the air smelled like wood smoke and leaves. My backyard is surrounded by a tall wooden fence, giving me a false sense of security. I set up a few chairs around the fire pit so they faced the house, lit the flames, and settled in with a blanket. I had my phone with me, but it was sitting on a table next to the fire. I wasn't paying much attention to it, just soaking in the quiet. It was about 10:30 p.m. when I heard the first odd sound. A faint thump came from the direction of my house. I froze, straining my ears to listen, but the noise didn't repeat. Figuring it might have been something falling over inside, I brushed it off and stayed by the fire. Minutes later, I heard another sound, this time louder. It was the distinct creak of a floorboard, but it came from inside the house. My stomach tightened as I realized I wasn't imagining things. I think someone was in my house. My first instinct was to call the police, but my phone wasn't sitting on the table next to me. To get it, I'd have to move closer to the house, and I didn't want to risk being seen through the windows. My backyard is pretty dark except for the glow of the fire, so I stayed put, hoping whoever was inside would leave quickly. The fire crackled loudly, masking the faint sounds coming from inside, but every now and then, I could hear muffled footsteps or the sound of something being moved. I realized I'd left the sliding glass door unlocked, the one leading from the backyard into the kitchen. That's probably how they got in. I felt trapped. If I stayed outside, I couldn't call for help, and if I went inside, I might walk straight into whoever was there. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Then I saw a shadow move across one of the lit windows in my living room. My heart sank. Whoever it was, they weren't in a rush. They were taking their time, searching through my things. I continued sitting as still as possible, barely breathing. I kept my eyes on the house, praying they wouldn't notice the backyard or decide to come out. Suddenly, I heard glass shattering. It sounded like my bedroom window. I mustered the courage to grab my phone. Staying low, I crept to the table, snatched it up, and ducked behind one of the chairs. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911, and I whispered into the phone, explaining what was happening. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and remain where I was. They said officers were already on their way. I felt a flicker of relief, but stayed frozen, staring at the house. Then I heard the back door slide open. I turned slowly and saw a figure step out onto the deck. The firelight flickered on their face, but I couldn't make out their features. They were holding something in their hand, and I couldn't tell if it was a weapon or something they'd stolen. I stayed crouched, gripping my phone like it was a lifeline, trying to stay hidden behind the chair. The person walked to the edge of the deck and stopped. They scanned the yard, their eyes pausing on the fire pit for what felt like forever. I thought for sure they saw me. But then they turned and walked back into the house. Moments later, I heard the faint sound of sirens. The burglar must have heard them too, because I saw their shadow dart through the living room and toward the front door. I stayed put, not wanting to risk anything, until I saw flashing red and blue lights through the gaps in the fence. The police found the front door wide open. They didn't catch the burglar, but they found a few of my belongings dropped near the street. Inside, my living room was trashed, drawers were emptied, and my bedroom window was shattered. The officers told me I was lucky. If I hadn't been outside, things could have turned out a lot worse. I didn't sleep that night, and honestly, I haven't felt safe in my house since.